A good day to all of you and welcome to the show Living Multiculturalism with Mayank Bhatt. You're watching TAG TV. The program is brought to you by the Canadian Thinkers Forum. Friends, today we have with us a Canadian-Japanese artist, Daisuke Takeya, who has been active both in Canada and in Japan for the last 20 years. He's going to talk about his recent exhibition that was on in Toronto, and also what has influenced him tremendously to change the way in which he looks at himself and his art. Welcome to the show, Takeya.
Okay, thank you.
So let's begin with what brought you to Toronto.
Actually, it's been a long time, so it's hard to remember now. But there's this program called Working Holiday between Japanese and Canadian governments, so that I was legally be able to work and live here for a year. So I was only thinking of staying here for a year, but then it happened to be longer than that.
So when you came here, were you already an artist, or is it something that you picked up while you were living in Canada?
No, I have already been an artist, and I wanted to exhibit, show my work internationally, so I think Canada was the first stop.
And what was your experience as an artist when you came here? Was there acceptance of your art? Was there, not very kind of lukewarm response? How would you, what was the experience?
Well, I had a few artist friends from before I came to Canada, so I have contacted them and participated in group exhibitions. And there's some outdoor or some art fair sort of things that I could participate. So slowly I decided, started showcasing my works and slowly caught up.
One of the things that I remember was when we met, I think it was the first time, you were interpreting a poem by a painting, and it was a unique kind of experiment where somebody was reading and you were painting. So do you think that that kind of experimentation in art is something that appeals to you?
Yes, absolutely. But before I came to Canada, I was purely a figurative, realistic painter. So that my practice only took place in my studio, meaning I spent like certain hours every day painting and go home. And I didn't really have the opportunity to interact with artists from different genres. But recently I have been like collaborating and working on multimedia activities.
And what has been, you had an exhibition recently in Toronto. It was, from the looks of what I saw, a very realistic kind of paintings that you had exhibited. Would you call yourself a realistic painter, artist, or would you call yourself, something that was more abstract, or would you call yourself a combination of both?
Actually, the exhibition at the Christopher Cutts Gallery in Toronto is about my paintings, but I consider my paintings as installations, and I think that my paintings are somewhat realistic and abstract and installational, so it's hard to describe it's hard to categorize in one way. So I would say it is yes abstract, yes realistic, and it's an installation as well.
So when we were talking before the show, before the interview began, you called yourself a hybrid artist.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
One of my signature works is the painting with large sky and the narrow strip of cityscape at the bottom. So when you first see the painting, it's an abstract color-filled painting. But when you step closer to the work and you started realizing that it's a depiction of Toronto or Niagara Falls, so I am playing with viewers' distance. So from certain viewpoints, it transforms from abstract art to realism art. So there's sort of like many layers into my works that way.
We were also talking about how certain events that happen, calamities, natural calamities, which impact you as an artist and changes the way in which you look at your own world and your own work. I want you to take us back to the journey which happened, 6 years ago, when the tsunami hit Japan and caused tremendous amount of devastation. And you were telling me that it changed you as a person as well as an artist. So please talk about that to us.
Absolutely, it changed quite much. When it happened 5 years ago, March 11th, 2011, I was in Toronto, like staying awake late and chatting with my friends on internet, and I saw the images of tsunami happening, swallowing cities and villages in northeastern part of Japan, and I was like, wow, and I was quite shocked that it seemed almost like a Hollywood films, that it had no authenticity to it. And then I collaborated with my friend, who's an independent curator, Rafi Gonagonian, to organize a fundraising event involving artists from different genres, musicians, writers, dancers, visual artists, all got together and raised over 10,000 Canadian dollars and donated. But that was not enough for me. It wasn't real enough. So I decided to go to the actual sites a few months later. Then what I saw was actually big sets of Hollywood films as well, that all the catastrophe, debris everywhere, boats on top of the buildings, and it was almost unbelievable. But then that sort of authenticity changed everything, that I've met with people who have been suffering there. That cannot be transmitted over the screens. So I had to actually in hand talk with them, interact with them, and do something about it. And that kind of like strong need changed everything about my life and my practice.
And how did it impact your work? What did you do with that? With that experience, what did you do with it?
Well, I started doing installations. I've started doing somewhat interactive stuff. One of the projects, what I've done, what I've been doing is called Filter Project. That is a humanitarian project that is in support of the survivors from the tsunami disaster. But many artists from Toronto participated in it, and it's an interactive work that it cannot be happening by my creation only. It has to involve like many people. It's kind of hard to explain, but maybe it's easier for me to visually explain it, and the work is there.
You were also talking to me about the fact that you organized in Toronto an event for the tsunami victims, in which you got a lot of participation from local artists and local poets. And so what was it, describe what happened and how did you manage to pull that to?
Well, I couldn't have done that by myself, but I had Rafi as my co-curator, and many artists had.
How many artists participated in that?
More than 100, I would say. And we spent only 2 weeks to prepare it, but the venue owner was like really kind, to let us use the space for free, and many sort of like continuous miracles happened, and more and more people wanted to participate. So it was not me creating something, but it was a public consciousness that made it happen.
And do you think that that experience is something that you are going to carry forward in everything that you do? Because when we were talking earlier, you told me that you had also been to Philippines where a similar kind of tragedy had occurred, and that is also impacting the work that you're doing.
Yes, the first I was doing projects in Japan and traveling with the project to over 20 cities. Then I started thinking about what happening elsewhere in the world. And yes, in the Philippines, Typhoon Haiyan and Yolanda devastated coastal areas in 2014, and they're still in early stages of recovery. And there's something that we can share, the knowledge or expertise or passion we had towards Japan. So decided to travel to other nations in Asia, and yeah.
In terms of having worked in Toronto for the last 16, 20 years, what has been your experience with the whole notion of Toronto being a multicultural society?
I think that influenced my existence so much because before that, I felt like I am an outsider. Being an artist, and to be very honest with you, art sometimes don't matter to many people. Well, it's a better way of saying it. But then in Toronto, under the multiculturalism environment, I feel like I'm part of it. Without me, the puzzle won't be solved. So I feel that my participation is as important as anybody else.
Do you think that the multicultural milieu also recognizes that you are contributing something while you are receiving something?
Absolutely. It cannot be one way. It always has to be two ways. That just giving and receiving, and I believe that I'm a lifelong learner, and I've been a school teacher for a certain amount of years in Toronto, and when I was teaching, I learned the most. So I cannot just be a teacher or learner. It's got to be the combination of both.
You also work in Tokyo, you told me.
Mm-hmm.
You spend your time in Japan, you spend your time in Toronto. So you are basically an artist who operates in two very different environments.
Mm-hmm.
How different is it to go back and start working in Tokyo after having lived and worked in Toronto for so long?
It's a very good question. I call it floating identity, that I feel like floating in the Pacific, that there are two different cultures and I've been living in, and I feel attached to both cultures. At the same time, I feel like I'm not in the culture sometimes. And I think that uniqueness is quite important because we're getting into the social media time, and I think that we can share the information, but the perspectives cannot really be integrated that easily. And in Toronto, yes, it can. It has been integrated like every day. Over years, but then Japan is not as multicultural as Toronto, and I think someone like me can bring in something from Canada. Then I think maybe closed society back there can open a little bit, so that we have better understanding of each other.
Do you think that Japanese society is open to your kind of ideas?
I don't know yet. Some people, yes, and many people have sort of like slowly opening up, but there's some hesitance and reluctancies happening at the same time as well. And I guess I can contribute to try to keep on opening up.
Do you, and this is a question that comes to me very often because I also belong to two different cultures, do you think that you have that responsibility, having lived in the Western society for as long as you have, to be able to go back to your own origins and change what you think needs to be changed? Is there a need for you to do that? And if so, how do you plan to do that, or how have you done that?
Okay, I'm not a politician or an ambassador, so I'm not intending to change people. I'm not the, I don't know, I don't have that kind of desire to, but somehow I believe that art, my practice, is something that people can, kind of thing, meaning art can be the hint to the change. meaning I'm not a person to try to contribute for the change, but my art can possibly be influencing some people who might act up for the change. And I see some problems, but that's only my perspective. And maybe people back there may think completely differently. And even if I think of the change is necessary, they might not. I think it is too risky to say that I can do something for the change. And I think I like it. I feel more comfortable saying that maybe through some art activities, there can be it can be the inspiration. Do you get that?
I understand. Yes, of course I do. I think that's a very relevant answer. Conversely, do you think that in the multicultural milieu that you work in Toronto, they are adequately receptive of your individuality as an artist, or do they bracket you as, you belong to the ethnic Japanese artist groups? Do they recognize you that no, you have something unique to contribute, or do they not?
I have been fortunate to be exhibiting through Christopher Cuts. That is one of the most established contemporary commercial galleries in Canada. So I hope that I've been considered as one important element within the art community. But at the same time, I'm not too sure exactly what the whole thing yet. So I may be doing something, I may be contributing something to it, but somehow the whole thing is not settled yet. I feel that comparing to like art scenes in Tokyo or Paris or London or New York, the Canadian art scene is still developing and evolving, and I personally don't see the whole picture yet. So I'm only hoping that I can be part of it.
Do you, when we talk about Canadian art scene, and I'm not familiar with it to the extent that you are, because you are an active participant in it, but I get this feeling that, as in literature or as in music or as in cinema, there is this very, very traditional mainstream Canadian art, and over the last 20 years there has been this resurgence or the emergence of what is not mainstream Canadian art, but it has a lot of ethnic influences, and those ethnic influences are from across the world. And mainstream Canadian art is not able to understand that. Is my understanding correct, or is it something that?
Yes, yes and no. I believe that that's one way of reading it. I'm not the art historian to publicly
No, but
say
as an
whether-
artist, as a practitioner, what is your experience?
I feel that there's some sort of like a linear, I don't know, context in within Canadian culture, art. However, it's slowly been transforming, I feel. But it's only the feeling that I can talk about right now. And I think it is quite difficult to getting into the scene. I don't know if you only talk about art scenes, and if you want to getting into New York art scene, it's kind of hard to getting into it. So same thing is happening in Toronto art scene too. So I don't know if that is something to do with the multiculturalism and mainstream Canadian art before that.
Do you think that the advent of social media, the age of digital age, art is becoming something that is no longer perceived as you don't need to have any standards. If you call yourself an artist, you are an artist. Is that a good thing, or is that something that we need to be cautious about?
It is an excellent thing. When I was teaching in elementary school in Toronto, we've said everybody's artist. And it's not your teachers, your parents, your friends telling you this is good or this is bad. And if you like it, if you're passionate about creating it, you're an artist. And I agree with it strongly. However, there must be some in-depth criticism for the creations. So maybe it's the same for writings as well. Like everybody's writer, everybody can write, and we can say that everybody's writers. But then there must be some sort of criticism that differ professionals and non-professionals, and that has something to do with art as well.
So, but who will do that?
That's a good question. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Well-known critic.
You have I want to kind of probe this further. You are an artist with about 25 years of experience in your life. I'm not an artist, but tomorrow I do a painting, and I put it up on the internet, on social media, and I get like few hundred likes. Is that art? Or is that what I'm calling that as art? I don't understand this.
Okay.
There is no threshold that you need to pass as an artist anymore. Whatever you want to do, you're doing, and you're calling that art.
That's a very good question. I think that that sounds very realistic, and if that happens, I would just like to congratulate you that you're a great artist, or I don't know, you've created good art. However, I think art is not a profession, or it's not a commodity. I believe that art, or being an artist, is a nature. That I consider myself as an artist or professional artist, but I'm an artist not because I'm making sales or holding exhibitions. I'm artist only because my nature tells me to create something, and I cannot stop that. Like drinking water, eating food, sleeping, doing anything, and I have to create something. I have to be doing that. So that makes me an artist. So you can be an artist for like 5 seconds or 5 hours or 5 months or 5 years, but then if it's not the absolute necessity for you to have in your life, then you may not be an artist after 5 years. But that is not to say that you're an artist if you spend 5 minutes creating something, and I can say that that's an art and that you're an artist.
Daisuke, you have given a very philosophical answer to my question. My question is still not answered, but
Okay.
and I will give you an example. You say that you have spent a lot of hours. Yes, there is an internal urge in you to create something all the time, but you create, and then you continue to work on that creation for many hours to make it perfect. I, on the other hand, will create something and put it up on the social media, and I will get 200 likes, and that makes me an artist. We are in the digital age. Who is going to tell what is good and what is not good?
I believe that no one's going to tell you what is good or what is bad anymore. But
and you don't need to?
It's a hard question to say yes or no.
As an artist, what do you think?
I believe that I believe in what I've been creating, and I like what I'm doing, and I love creating things. And if that's being valued, my creation's being valued, I appreciate it. But that doesn't mean that my art is good or bad. Maybe it works for certain people or certain occasions, but for some people it may never work. So it's almost like liking and disliking. And I mean, to me, the question, like, good art or bad art, it's almost like I like this or I don't like it. And that's not the point of creating art. And I think within the digital age, maybe 5 seconds instant thing created by non-professional, like ordinary person can be much more effective than experienced artists spending long time for one art. That's completely possible, but that doesn't make any comparisons for which one is better or which one's good and which one is bad. So it's quite complex, and I personally like this time because you won't be prejudged for your creations. So you can just, if you want to do it, just do it. and let's see what happens. And I think going back to your previous question, that I have been a studio artist, like passionate about making paintings, but I've been doing lots of projects seemingly unrelated to my studio practice, but somehow it's very important in me as an artist that some sort of interactions, doing something that I don't know the outcome of, the end result of, is something very challenging and important, and that is perfectly possible in our present time, and it was not that possible beforehand.
You were talking about the need to connect with people, which was a change that brought about by the tsunami experience. How critical is it to your creativity today to be able to relate to people?
Yes, it was absolutely important, and it has transformed my practice completely. And I think I am more real. And when you talk with people, like there's like, it's not like me chatting with you over SNS or talking on the phone. I'm looking at you, your eyes, and you're smiling, and this kind of like directness, authenticity is quite important, and could not happen with my previous ways of method of creating art. And now it is possible, and I think that is the only way I can get influenced or inspired without having direct human interactions. It is hard for me now to create art. I think I need that resource.
Well, Daisuke, it has been a pleasure talking to you. Before we end the interview, I wanted to ask you, do you want to share some kind of last thoughts that you may have with our audience?
Well, I am quite fortunate to be based in Toronto, and I don't believe I travel quite much, mainly in Asia, sometimes to Europe, but I've never seen this sort of setup environment anywhere else, and I think we have the future here that every one of us, are creating together, and I think we're becoming a good model for other worlds who are suffering from some sort of like social restrictions that not necessary.
Okay, we will not stop here because this is a very interesting point that you made. What do you think is happening across the world in terms of the political changes that we are experiencing, and how does it impact the kind of society that you and I live in right now?
I think that Canada has been great, and I think it will continue being great. But some other parts of the globe trying to, I don't know, enclose themselves, and that is maybe, I don't know, sign of our time. But then it has contained lots of danger in those transformation. Like maybe like people like us, people like me, some sort of like, I don't know, ordinary person might get easily misinfluenced or misguided towards something careless or something less considerate. I may be offending some people by doing something that I would normally do without knowing, by being ignorant, and those things can happen, and those mainstream media broadcasting, the changes, we can get so easily be influenced by them, and that is quite dangerous. And I would like to continue being aware of those transformations, and because I live in Toronto and I go to Asia often, I can sort of like warn people in some very indirect ways.
Well, that has been a very profound observation. Thank you so much, Daisuke, for being with us today.
Thank you.
you gave us a tremendous insight into what creativity means for you, especially in the multicultural environment. So, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Friends, that was Daisuke Takeya, who is a Canadian Japanese artist and has been very active both in Canada and in Japan for the last 2 decades. I hope you like the show. Before I end, I always say that Living Multiculturalism with Mayank Bhatt on TAG TV, a program that is brought to you by the Canadian Thinkers Forum, is your program. You have to write to us to tell us who you want to meet, who you want to talk, listen to, and who would you like to see featured on this program. So keep writing, and thank you for being with us today. Have a good day, all of you.
#1 multicultural channel. This is TAG TV.